Nok Air Airline DD9407 from Skonnakorn to Bangkok, and Thai Airline TG676 from Bangkok to Tokyo, faced with interrupted engine, which was unknown at the first. Then, Bird Strike Committee of United States and United Air Force showed that there has been more than 200 planes hit with birds since 1988, especially it keeps increasing in the past 20 years because the birds try to migrate from pollution and insecticide at the place they live. In the year 2008, there were more than 5,000 cases that plane got crashed with birds, which usually occurs when the plane is taking off or landing. How can a small bird interrupt huge bird or plane? It's because when the birds fly into propeller or the engine, there will be unusual force and impact to another propeller, which can lead to multiple damage and stalled engine. Of course, the birds travel as a group and increase chance of accident. On 15 January 2009, there was an accident. Airbus 320 flight number 1549 of US Airways that hit with birds after taking off at LaGuardia Airport, New York City, within few minutes, which made the engine stalled. Fortunately, Captain managed to have an emergency landing into Hudson River. All passengers were saved.
In early 2001, a Boeing 747 carrying 427 passengers took off from Tokyo Haneda International Airport. The flight proceeded normally until it reached an altitude of 12,000 meters and accelerated. Everything was as normal as it used to be. There was another flight a little earlier on the same date. A Japanese airline flight between South Korea Busan and Japan Tokyo had just operated the same, accelerating as well at an altitude of about 11,000 meters. The two planes had the same flight path, just 600 meters apart, and had to meet over the Japanese island of Honshu. Hideki Hashitani, a 26-year-old officer, was sitting behind radar at the control tower, overseeing both flights. The stress of monitoring more than 10 planes overwhelmed him, so it was common for him to be unable to perform the duty alone. When he noticed the potential for collision, he quickly contacted a flight from Busan that was flying 11,000 meters above the ceiling and told him to press his head down to increase the gap between the planes. But even though he made a terrible big mistake, he contacted the wrong plane. Instead of telling the airplane at the ceiling of 11,000 meters to lower the ceiling, another pilot following his advice and lowering the plane from 12,000 meters to 11,000 meters, the same height as another plane. The two planes were facing each other at 800 km per hour on the path. To the current collision, Hashitani began to panic when he noticed that the plane from Busan hadn't descended at all. He hurried to advise him to turn right, but the other didn't read any plan for some unknown reason. The message from the air traffic control tower was disrupted and the pilot had no idea how much danger they were in. Seeing Hashitani panic behind the dashboard, his supervisor came over and controlling the situation. She contacted a flight from Busan to climb immediately, but it turns out that her author had reached an unapologetic fight that day. So the two planes ignored them because they didn't know the message meant to them. And finally, the Boeing pilot realized that another plane was nearby, but his air traffic control reliance helped him. Of course, if something bad happened, someone should send him some advice already. At that point, the collision seemed inevitable, but everything seemed normal to the passengers on the flight. Fortunately for the over 600 passengers, the pilot was well trained and confident in the situation. He looked through the windshields and saw another plane heading towards him. But with a sharp reaction and calm mind, the Boeing pilot lowered the planes at lowest possible seconds before the collision, and the Boeing flew below the other planes, causing the two to avoid the collision. More than 600 lives had been saved, but not all of them have survived safely. As passengers are completely unaware of the incident, therefore hardly anyone will fasten their seatbelt. And because of the sudden movement of the plane, many people hit the ceiling with force like a car crash. But only 7 passengers and 2 crews were seriously injured, and the rest with only minor injury. The pilot returned to Tokyo for all the wounded to be treated. Thanks to medical team and the pilot's skill, everyone on the flight survived.
Thai Airways flight TG114 was to be domestic passenger flight from Bangkok to Chiang Mai, Thailand, and was scheduled to depart about 15:15. Thai Airways flight TG114 was to be the 5th flight of the day. The previous flight landed about 14:14 immediately after the explosion. Witness report smoke in the center cabin and the fire underneath the center wing tank CWT area. Approximately 18 minutes after the explosion, a second explosion occurred in the right wing fuel tank of the Thai Airways flight TG114. On March 3, 2001 at 2:48 p.m., 35 minutes before the scheduled departure while the plane was parked at Bangkok International Airport, Don Mueang, the plane exploded. The results of the investigation revealed that the combustion occurred at the central fuel tank with the close to the air conditioning system, which were conditionally and high heat. At the time of accident, there were no passengers on board, only 8 officers, one of whom died. These flights accompanied by many important people, Thaksin Shinawatra, the Prime Minister, and Phanthongthep Shinawatra, who will travel to Chiang Mai after the accident, said the blast was an assassination attempt by foreigners due to the government drugs suppression policy after Thai forensics officials found evidence they believed to be a trace of the C4 or Simtex bomb. However, on April 11, 2001, the National Transportation Safety Board, which also sent experts to join the investigation, said the parts had been tested at the FBI lab and found no traces of the explosive, and the case is similar to the explosion of a Philippine Airlines Boeing 737 in May 2000, which was caused by a defect in the fuel tank. The AAIC determined that the probable cause of the accident was an explosion of CWT resulting from ignition of the flammable fuel and mixture in the tank. The source of ignition energy for the explosion could not be determined with certainty, but the most likely source for an explosion originating at the CWT pump as a result of running the pump in the presence of metal shaving and fuel and mixture.